Greetings and welcome to this week's episode of Bronx Bombers. My name is Joe Rubenstein and it is Wednesday, September 5th, and the Yankees, since that sweep in Baltimore, which seems like a century ago, lost a series to the horrible White Sox at the stadium. They split a series with the equally horrible Tigers at the stadium and dropped the first game out in Oakland and are trending in the exact wrong direction at the worst possible time. They're starting a very tough, crucial West Coast swing in these final weeks of the season, and with the division now lost, home field in the do-or-die wildcard game is very much in jeopardy. Yikes. And just on a side note as far as programming, the podcast is back on a weekly basis as of now. So we'll be here every week until the very end of the season, but the next 2 episodes will come out on Thursday rather than Wednesday just because of the Jewish holidays and how they're scheduled this year. But I'll be coming at you every week through the postseason, and some of you have emailed about whether or not we'll be releasing episodes during the off-season, and the answer is most definitely yes. I'm not sure if it's going to be every week, but the Bronx Bombers podcast will be here for you every week through the postseason, whether the Yankees are bounced out or not, and rest assured we'll also be here for you in the winter months as well. So, as they say, no rest for the wicked. You can follow us on Twitter at Bombers Podcast is the handle. You can also send us questions. We'll try to answer each and every week in our mailbag segment here on the podcast. You can like us on Facebook, subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher. We are on Spotify as well, or give us a call, 646-854-4959, and as always, you can send your comments and questions to joe@bronxbomberspodcast.com. Really, however you'd like to engage with us, we love engaging with you. Coming up a little bit later on in our Twitter poll this week, some interesting results when we asked what the Yankees have to do for you to consider the season a success, and I'll answer a fascinating and frankly crucial question from one of our followers about who should start the wild card game. Also, he's the host of the Bronx Pinstripes Show. Andrew Rotondi rejoins the show for a wide-ranging conversation you will not want to miss, and we'll go through the good, the bad, and the ugly from this last week of action. All that and more coming up on today's Bronx Bombers. Back in a moment.
Bronx Bombers Trivia. Which of these 4 players was the longest tenured Yankee captain? Was it A, Babe Ruth, B, Don Mattingly, C, Derek Jeter, or D, Lou Gehrig? The answer coming up a little bit later in the podcast.
And now here's Joe with this week's main thing.
Now, today's Twitter poll section is unusually long, and I'm going to say a lot of things there that I would normally get to here as far as the state of the Yankees. So, very briefly, I don't like what I see from this team. I don't like it at all. Monumentally inconsistent, especially the pitching. Sluggish. Yes, there are bright spots, and we'll get to those in a second, but this is not championship-level baseball, guys. It just isn't. You don't see teams get consistently mediocre starts like every day and win big in the postseason. Now, I'm recording this right before Jay Happ goes against what looks like it's going to be a bullpen day from Oakland, so manager Bob Melvin taking a page out of Tampa's playbook. We'll see how that goes, but yeah, I mean, Yankee pitching is a mess, and beyond that, you don't see teams play this really Bush League level defense and win big in the postseason with really the majority of our infield, now that Sanchez is back, just, unable to consistently make accurate throws to first base, and in the case of Sanchez, unable to block balls that are like right on his glove. So there's a kind of constant war in social media where people like myself get accused of being negative. Honestly, I'm just reflecting back what I see on a day-to-day basis from this team. And if you go back to my episodes in May during that great 17-1 run, you'll hear plenty of positivity back then. So look, if I come off as negative, I think it's a pretty safe bet that the team just isn't playing well. And I'm reporting and commenting on that so people can have all the faith they want. And I end every episode with the words, "Have faith in the Yankees," mostly because that's a quote from Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. But, when faith turns into blind faith, that to me gets kind of problematic, but, again, to each his own. And with that, we get into the good, the bad, and the ugly as we take a hard look at some of the performances from this past week and see who measured up and who did not. And the good section begins and ends with one guy this week. I mean, yes, Andujar and Torres have been hot with the bats, but they've both really been guilty of some ugly defense. And I said this on Twitter, in big games against tough teams like Oakland, if you have weak defensive infielders, the ball will find you, as it did Andujar on Monday with that horrible throwing error that scored a run. But the headliner this week is Luke Voit, who's having one of those patented, remarkable late-season Yankee runs by a newcomer. For those of you old enough to remember 1998, you had rookie Shane Spencer that year going absolutely nuts that September, hitting 10 home runs, including 3 grand slams. That was totally insane. And then 2 years ago, you had Gary Sanchez becoming the fastest player ever to reach 19 home runs in the modern era. Sanchez played in just 53 games that season and hit .299 with 20 home runs and 42 RBIs. And look, we're not there yet with Voit, but you gotta like what you see. First of all, he's got this really infectious smile. He's just like this big country boy who's having the time of his life. So he brings a very welcome shot of energy to this tired ball club. And since we acquired him on July 27th, hitting .336, on-base percentage .407, 6 home runs, 14 RBIs, OPS over 1,000. So that little speck you see in the sky getting smaller and smaller and smaller is Greg Bird flying into the sunset. It looks like he's been Wally pipped here. And, you know, it's tough, but this is the majors. You don't produce, there's always going to be somebody hot on your heels, happy to take your job. So Bird, who's, he's hit the ball hard a few times this week. I mean, he came within inches of hitting a grand slam on Sunday during that awful loss to the Tigers, but a loud out is just an out, and his average has been circling the drain for some time now. It's down to, 197, okay? But Luke Voit is certainly a man on the make, and we really haven't had consistent production at first base since Teixeira, so it's a great job by the big country boy and sorely needed. Now, with the bad section, I mean, the offense has actually stepped up pretty well for most of this past week. Gardner was slumping, but he did have a few big hits. Stanton's been ice cold. I think he's now 3 for his last 26 with just a boatload of strikeouts. But the real problem area for this team, as it's been all year, is the pitching, which, with the exception of Tanaka's terrific start on Saturday against the Tigers, has been just god-awful. I mean, CeCe, just a nightmarish performance by Sabathia on Monday in Oakland. I mean, the defense didn't help. Andujar with that terrible throw. You had Sanchez with just an inexcusable passed ball. I don't think that led to a run, that passed ball, but CeCe just couldn't get out of his own way. He couldn't even get through the 4th inning, actually. So the only productive aspect of that performance by Sabathia was the fact that Larry Rothschild got some good exercise in there, running to the pitching mound and back to the dugout, so good for him. But I'll just say it here. CeCe is gassed. He looks out of shape. He's huffing and puffing. He doesn't throw hard anymore. So, major league hitters are going to foul those pitches off, and that pitch count of his gets elevated very, very fast, and the A's just knocked him around. And Jay Happ, who's been one of our strongest pitchers, actually, was just terrible last Thursday against Detroit. He couldn't get through the 5th inning against the Tigers. The Tigers! Come on, man. That's an awful team. And they just raked Happ over the coals. 10 hits, 3 home runs. And what was brutal was we actually had a lead in that game in the 9th. We scratched and clawed our way back. Boone sends out Betances to close. I did not agree with that decision. I said so at the time. And bam, Betances gives up 2 back-breaking home runs to Victor Martinez and Nico Goodrum. Goodrum just destroyed us in that series. So Happ was awful and a rare misstep from Betances, who's had a good year otherwise. And then Lance Lynn, who I praised on this podcast just 4 weeks ago, he had a good run initially. His first 3 starts in Pinstripes, he had an 0.54 ERA, so that's amazing. But these last 4, it's 9.16, so night and day, or day and night, I guess. And it might be good night for Lynn, as I've heard the Yankees are weighing whether or not he's going to stay in this rotation, which again, does not have a single reliable pitcher. So the ugly section at this point is got to be the whole staff. So, we'll see what happens, but I've never lied on this podcast, and I'm not going to start now, so I'll just say this. I will be very surprised, shocked actually, if this team with this roster wins a championship this year. The Yankees, to me, look like a team without an identity other than the home run ball, and the pitching and the fundamentals are seriously lacking. So, to me, on September 5th, with only 23 games remaining, including 3 in Seattle, 4 in Tampa, and 6 against the Red Sox, the only question right now is whether or not this wild card game is in the Bronx or in Oakland. You know, the truth is, a winner-go-home game like that, no matter where it is really a roll of the dice. I mean, anything can happen. And if it's in Oakland, I wouldn't give the Yankees even a 50-50 shot of winning that game. I really wouldn't. Back in a moment. We are joined this week on Bronx Bombers once again by our friend Andrew Rotondi, who, along with Scott Reinen, hosts the phenomenal Bronx Pinstripes Show. They've been covering the Yankees for years, and you would do well to check it out and subscribe to that show on iTunes. Andrew, it's great to have you back on the podcast. How are you?
Good, Joe. Thanks, and thanks for that little plug there.
So I'm going to start today with a more personal question, Andrew. Last year was probably the most fun I've had personally following the Yankees since the 90s. Definite bumps in the road, but it was really exciting just to see a bunch of young players exceed expectations. But this season, I'll be honest, and this probably sounds crazy to say about a team that's like 30 games over 500, but personally, I really haven't enjoyed it nearly as much. It's not just the losses to so many terrible teams. Even our wins, or at least a lot of them, seem to be somehow marred by either, a minor bullpen implosion or an injury or some god-awful defensive or base running mistakes. So Andrew, speaking not so much as a podcaster, but more as a fan, what's this season been like for you compared to last year on a pure enjoyment level?
I definitely agree with you. It's been less, but I think it's not so much as for the reasons you described, where they've had a lot of scary wins. This team has not played well over the last really month and a half since the All-Star break. But I think it's because expectations were set to an all new level this year. Last year was, hey, if they compete for a wild card spot, that's a good year. And they ended up going to Game 7 of the championship series. So everything was gravy. Everything was a lot of fun because we didn't expect it. Judge came in and almost won the MVP. Gary Sanchez actually backed up his rookie season. Severino took the step forward and became the Yankees ace. Like, all that stuff was a ton of fun. This year, they went out and they got Stanton. That was a classic mid-2000s Yankees move. It was pretty much World Series, get to the World Series or bust. And so anything less than that's going to feel like a letdown. And I really think that's why it's been less fun, is because the expectations are a lot higher. We know how good this team can be. We saw it between the end of April and pretty much through the All-Star break. And now we're not seeing it, so it's frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, this might be a reach, but do you think that the Red Sox, who have been so good all year, that now they might be burdened with high expectations and have more pressure in the playoffs, and the Yankees, who have not been playing well, might have a little less?
Well, I mean, the Red Sox have struggled in the postseason the last few years. They have not won a postseason series since they won the World Series in 2013. So this team anyway, this version of the Red Sox has a lot to prove. So I think there'll definitely be pressure on them. You win 110 plus games, which they're going to, unless you win the World Series, it pretty much means nothing. Like, ask the Seattle Mariners about that from 2001. No one remembers that team. They just remember the fact that they lost to the Yankees in the playoffs. So I guess, but I don't think it's going to affect the Yankees. I think the Yankees, once they're in the playoffs, fans' expectations are going to be, you got to get at least back to the ALCS.
So the Yankees recently lost a pair of series at home to the White Sox and the Tigers, both currently 28 games under 500. Well, we barely escaped the season series against the Marlins with a split. We've struggled all season long with Baltimore, at least until that last series. So, Andrew, I guess my question is, what is the effing deal? I mean, how is it possible that a team capable of winning the season series against the Astros decisively, including 3 out of 4 in their house, can put forth such consistently weak efforts against teams that aren't even remotely contending?
Yeah, and this last week with Chicago and Detroit may have been the worst of it all season, because they come off that sweep of Baltimore and they had momentum. I think, what did they cut it to, 6 back in the loss side of the Red Sox after that Sunday night game in Baltimore?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, and then they come out and completely lay an egg. They're booting the ball all over the field. sloppy play, errors. The bullpen is blowing games. They're only scoring when they hit a home run. So this last week of baseball has been really, really terrible. I don't know why they can't play against bad teams, and they do play well against good teams. Do you think that's maybe inexperience? A lot of young kids that lose focus mentally. Maybe you could blame coaching on that Boone does not have them mentally prepared for a series against the Miami Marlins, but he doesn't need to do anything extra to get them prepared for a series against Houston or against Boston?
It's tough. I mean, sometimes I think the Yankees, just because of what the franchise is and because of expectations, tend to believe their own press clippings and maybe don't bring the same intensity level against the lesser teams.
Yeah, but isn't that like a cop-out?
Of course, it's terrible, and it absolutely should not happen. But I'm saying, it could be what happens. But again, these are tough questions for outsiders to get a grip on.
You can't analyze it, really. All you can analyze is that for whatever reason, the team does not perform as well against bad teams. And the thing is, there's so many bad teams in the league. You've got your playoff teams, and then you've got a bunch of really, really terrible teams that they should be demolishing. That's the reason the Red Sox are going to win 110 plus games, is because they play the majority of their games against Baltimore and Toronto and Kansas City and all these shitty teams that they just crush. You look up and it's the fourth inning of a Red Sox game and they're up 7-1 when the Yankees are just like trying to edge out a win against Baltimore or something.
Now, Brian Cashman made a couple of deals just before the September 1st deadline, sending a couple of minor leaguers to the Giants for our veteran right fielder Andrew McCutchen, and then literally at the last minute picking up another veteran, infielder Adini Hechavarria from Pittsburgh. So did you like those deals, and what's your best case scenario for what we might get out of those two guys for the remainder of the season and hopefully deep into the playoffs?
Well, the fact that Shane Robinson played the entire month of August, I think made me like any deal that brought in an outfielder. And I don't know why they waited so long. I know the Giants didn't place McCutchen on waivers until towards the end of that week, so that's why it took a while. But there were guys like Granderson out there and other outfielders that could have come in and given the Yankees a better option than Shane Robinson. So yeah, I like getting McCutchen because it's not Shane Robinson. I found it a little funny to watch Yankees fans on social media act like the Yankees are acquiring 2016 or 2015 Andrew McCutchen when he's coming off his MVP season, because he's not that player anymore. But he's still a well above average player that can help. But didn't it also scare you that this means bad things for Judge? Because it scared me.
Well, first of all, I do think Judge is going to play again this year. I mean, he took some swings on Monday and said he was more or less pain-free. And just the vibe that I'm getting is we'll see him again. And I think before the playoffs. The thing with McCutchen, he's never played for an American League team. And we've seen some really good hitters this year switch leagues, like Stanton and Evan Longoria out in San Francisco. And at least initially they struggled. So I'm sort of managing my expectations with McCutchen.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the Yankee fans might be expecting a lot, and that's certainly going to be an adjustment, and he's going to have to do it so rapidly because, like you said, he's got a month to figure it out. That's not really much time at all. But just from a team perspective on the field, I don't see how you could not like the upgrade from Robinson to McCutchen.
So Luis Severino has had, a schizophrenic season. I mean, close to untouchable through mid-July, but since then he's been hit very hard, and yet the velocity is unchanged and there's no apparent injury. So Andrew, I know it's tough, it's really impossible for those of us on the outside to diagnose these things, but have you seen anything different from Severino that might account for this dip, or do you think maybe it's mental? I mean, how worried are you about our ace?
Well, it's definitely my biggest concern for the team at the moment, because I think that they have enough depth position player wise that they can overcome either an injury or if a guy's just not performing well. I mean, don't get me wrong, Judge not being there is a huge blow. He's their best player, so that hurts. But they have enough guys in that on that offense that can still produce. If Severino is not pitching like he did in the first half of the season, I don't see this team going very deep in the playoffs. As far as what's wrong with him, I mean, Scott and I on our podcast must have spent 5 episodes straight trying to figure out what the hell is going wrong with him. Because like you said, he's still throwing 97 to 99 miles an hour, but his fastball's getting hit more, his slider's getting hit more. He kind of abandoned his changeup in a couple of those starts. It was mislocation. It was everything. Everything was not working except the velocity. And really, like 99, if you're not locating it, is hittable, believe it or not.
Now, on a more positive note, one recent acquisition, 27-year-old first baseman Luke Voit, is just a man on fire. I mean, this is a guy who was called up to the bigs for the first time only last year in St. Louis. Now, he did have an OPS close to 750 with the Cardinals, but what he's been doing in pinstripes is just insane. I mean, 6 home runs in his last 10 games, batting .360 in that span. So a couple things. Do you think this guy could be the answer at first base beyond this year? I mean, he's under team control at minimum wage for 2 more seasons, not even eligible for arbitration until 2021. So do you think this guy's for real? And has Greg Bird been Wally pipped here?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that Greg Bird totally got Wally pipped. And it's injuries with Greg Bird. It's, is he healthy? Is he not healthy? He just can't perform. It's so many different things with Greg Bird. Voit, this is fun. I think we need to enjoy it while it lasts, because I have no clue if he could do this for another 2 games, never mind another 2 years or 2 weeks or whatever. I think they got to ride him while he's playing well. Ride the hot hand at first base, because that's the situation that Greg Bird has put you in. They owe absolutely nothing to Greg Bird at this point. But if Voit stops hitting and you put in Greg Bird and he starts hitting, then you ride that hot hand. I don't think any of us have seen enough of Voit to say he can be this player, but it's fun. And it's fun because the Yankees have had no production for 3 straight seasons at first base. I think I saw a stat there, if not last, but near last in Major League Baseball in first base run production. That is a tough spot to have no production from.
So the Yankees seem to live and die by the long ball. I mean, most home runs in the majors by far with 225. The closest is the Dodgers, and they have 33 fewer. However, we also have the 3rd most strikeouts in the American League, 1,209. Only Chicago and Texas are worse in that category. Are you comfortable with this swing for the fences approach? I mean, can we win a championship if our lineup continues to rely on the home run ball and strikes out at this pace, or does this need to change? And if it does need to change, do the Yankees maybe need to find themselves a new hitting coach this offseason?
I have a tough time blaming the hitting coach for this, because this is the players that Brian Cashman has assembled the roster with. Judge is that type of player, Sanchez, Stanton, even we've seen Didi like increase his power, decrease his contact. So there's a lot of players that are just going to strike out a lot. The beauty of this lineup when everyone was healthy, like I think back to May, specifically April, May, and June, is when they had Torres and Andujar at the bottom of the order. They had a little bit better contact skills, and it lengthened the lineup so much, and it made 1 through 9 dangerous in different ways. And right now, especially since they've had these injuries, they haven't had that, because they've had Austin Romine, Shane Robinson, and other bad backup players hitting down towards the bottom of the order, and they've had to move Andujar, Glaber, and other players up. So I think that's why the offense has struggled more. I just don't expect it to change. This is the team that Cashman has built. This is what he thinks wins in 2018. Walk a lot, hit a lot of home runs, and that's how you're going to score your runs.
So we talked about Severino, and if you look at the starting rotation as a whole right now, I mean, there really isn't a single guy you can count on to go out there and get the job done. I mean, we saw Sabathia struggle again on Monday. Tanaka is inconsistent. Lynn is just falling off the map. Happ has been good, but Detroit just lit him up. So simple question, who do you trust the most, Andrew, to start that wild card game on Wednesday, October 3rd?
It's such a fluid situation, isn't it? Every night you watch somebody else go out there and you're like, oh, maybe he's going to be the guy that they trust because he actually got them into the 6th inning. Happ had been so consistent for the Yankees, and then, like you said, he got crushed by one of the worst offenses in baseball with Detroit. And I know he had struggled all season against Detroit, but still, it's no excuse. Tanaka's probably been their most consistent pitcher in the second half of the season, but I don't trust Tanaka. Like the October we saw Tanaka give last year, I think was not what we can expect again. I think that is asking a lot. So gun to my head, probably still Severino, but I'm not super confident in that choice. And I think that it's going to come down to who's pitching better at that point. And if Tanaka is pitching better like he is right now than Severino, then Boone's probably going to go with him. Yeah, like you said, Lance Lynn, The fact that Lance Lynn gave him like one good relief appearance and then one good game in Chicago, and everyone thought he was going to be the next Aaron Small. I find it hilarious because we just ignored the fact he had a 5+ ERA for the entire season coming in.
It's true, but with the wild card, I mean, the reason I'd go with Severino, and I'd love your take on this, if we win that game, Hap's numbers against Boston are just way better than Severino's, who they've just destroyed. So going Severino in that wild card game gives you Hap for game 1 and potentially game 5.
Yeah, I like that kind of that thinking ahead approach. I don't think Hap is really in the running unless something drastic happens. I think right now it's between Tanaka and Severino in Boone's mind.
Agreed.
You mentioned the fact that they're lining up for Boston, but Severino's pitching against Oakland in the final game of this current series. Be interesting to see how he does against them. That's probably going to be the matchup he'll face in the wild card if he gets the start.
Okay, final question, Andrew. I'll ask you the same thing I asked in our recent Twitter poll. What do the Yankees have to do this year for you to consider the season a success?
Well, if you had asked me before the All-Star break, I would have definitely said back to the ALCS. But seeing now where they are, the fact that they're going to be the wild card team and they're going to have to go to Boston, who is having a historically great season, while it would absolutely crush me and suck so bad to lose to the Red Sox in the playoffs, they're not going to be favored in that series. So if they go to game 5 of that series and lose to Boston, I don't see how you could sit here logically and say that they failed this year. It'll suck. But I think when we think about it logically, we'll say, well, that team got as far as that team was supposed to get.
Yeah, losing game 5 to Boston would definitely suck, but how much worse would it be to lose like the series at the stadium in game 4? Or actually, how does that work with home and away in the ALDS?
Yeah, it's 2-2-1. So the 4 would be losing in the Bronx and 5 would be losing. It's going to suck no matter what. And who knows, maybe the Yankees are playing better than Boston at that time, because it's kind of amazing that baseball's so long, and then it's whoever's playing the best at the end of the year. Because the Yankees were not supposed to beat Cleveland last year. Cleveland was one of the best teams in baseball last year. They won 22 games in a row?
Yep.
No one thought the Yankees were going to beat them in the 5-game series, and they did. So it could happen again. That's kind of the randomness of the baseball playoffs.
All right, Andrew, thanks so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. I'm a huge fan of your work on the Bronx Pinstripes Show, which all of our listeners should go check out on iTunes and subscribe to. So enjoy the stretch run, man, and let's hope it ends with champagne and smiles all around.
Yeah, that's what we're all hoping for. I think, like you said at the beginning, let's just start enjoying the season more, because I was having a lot of fun in May. I want to go back to that.
Couldn't agree more. All right, we'll come back. More Bronx Bombers in just a moment.
And now the answer to today's Bronx Bombers trivia question. Who was the longest tenured Yankee captain? The answer? C. Derek Jeter. And now here's Joe with this week's Twitter poll.
Yes, this week's Twitter poll results are in. We asked you this. What do the Yankees need to accomplish for you to consider this season a success? And 56% of our followers on Twitter at Bombers Podcast said win the World Series. 20% said win the Division Series, so duplicate last year's accomplishment. 16% said win the ALCS, so advance one round further than last year. And 8% said win the wild card, which frankly I'm surprised anyone voted for that. To me, getting bounced in the first round would not be a remotely successful season. But look, obviously there's no right or wrong answer to this question, but generally speaking, there's two schools of thought when it comes to what defines seasonal success in Major League Baseball. Now, one school of thought, let's call it the contextual school, says that you have to look at each season in context relative to its own given set of circumstances. For example, let's say the Yankees this season were in the initial stages of like a full-on rebuild, like what the White Sox are doing, and also we had a boatload of injuries to boot. But despite all that, we managed to make the playoffs and then got bounced in the first round. The contextual school of thought would say, with some justification, I think, that it would be absurd to say that under those circumstances that season had been anything less than a success. And frankly, last year, with so many young players making their postseason debuts, a season when no one had us picked to finish higher than third place, the fact fact that we made it to within a game of the World Series, losing in 7 to the eventual world champs, as painful as that was at the time, there's a strong case to be made by the contextual school that 2017 was a successful season for the New York Yankees. So that's one way of looking at it. The other way, which is sort of unique to the Yankees, well, let's shift our focus to politics for like 30 seconds. No longer, I promise. There's an ideology in the political realm called American exceptionalism. And American exceptionalism states that the United States is unique among all nations with respect to its ideas concerning democracy and personal freedom. And this concept of American exceptionalism is hotly debated from every conceivable angle, as you might imagine. Some say that it's accurate, some say it's arrogant, others, see various shades of gray, and this podcast is certainly not the proper forum for that debate. But back to baseball, there is a school of thought similar to that among more traditional Yankee fans and Yankee players and management for that matter. So let's call this school of thought Yankee exceptionalism, which holds that the Yankees, because of their really unparalleled tradition of success, should be held to their own unique standard, a standard which states that any season not ending in a championship is a failure. And that was certainly George Steinbrenner's attitude, at times to his detriment. I mean, Yankee manager Dick Howser back in 1980 won 103 games, but then Kansas City got some revenge for 77 and 78 and swept us in the ALCS, which was 5 games back then. And then Howser was fired. And that firing really initiated a decade of just a ridiculous amount of managerial turnover. But that was Steinbrenner's attitude for sure, title or bust. And that was certainly Derek Jeter's attitude in that period that he played here from 1995 through 2014. And remember, that core 4 era was not, wall-to-wall championships. I mean, we had 5, which was amazing. But mixed in there, we also had 7 first-round exits, 3 losses in the ALCS, 2 World Series losses, and 3 years when we didn't even make the playoffs. But here's what Jeter said in 2011 after we lost in 5 to the Tigers in the ALDS. He said this, quote, "There's a lot of positives over the course of the year, but like I always tell you guys, it's pretty black and white. You win or you lose," unquote. And there was no convincing Derek Jeter, who really kind of exemplified the Yankee way, which goes back all the way to Lou Gehrig and Joe DiMaggio, that the 2011 season, or really any other that didn't end with a title, was a success. As for me, I'll be honest, I don't know how to feel about this season. I mean, I think to an extent, the Yankees and their fans, including yours truly, maybe got caught up a little too much in the preseason hype, mostly because of the acquisition of Giancarlo Stanton, but also because of last season's incredible playoff run. But the expectations game can burn you in sports and in life, and reality has a way of stepping in sometimes and teaching you some hard lessons. But, I think injuries to an extent have really hurt us this year, and that's something that nobody can predict. But the fact is, certain players we counted on to have big years simply have not showed up. Sanchez, Bird, really our entire starting rotation, certain members of our vaunted bullpen. But my attitude right now, I would say, about expectations is not to have any. I mean, if we get bounced out early, then hey, we didn't deserve any better, and maybe that's the kick in the pants that Cashman needs to get super aggressive this offseason and give this pitching staff the kind of serious overhaul that I believe it desperately needs. But just to try to end this segment on a positive note, I do think it's important for Yankee fans to remember how lucky we are just to have a competitive team. For all of our recent struggles, we do have an actual outside shot, a path to win it all this year. I mean, yes, that path is strewn with serious obstacles, both from outside and within, but it does in fact exist. I mean, the Giants have a higher payroll than we do, and look how that turned out. They sputtered from the get-go and currently sit in 4th place, 2 games under 500. The Nationals also have a higher payroll than we do, and they blew up their season in mid-August. I mean, done, finished, see you in April. And I also believe that before this current crop of talented young players hits free agency, I think there's a really good chance we'll have another title. I'm not saying it'll be this year necessarily, but we'll get there. Just got to get the pitching and the defense straightened out. All right, from this week's mailbag, our question of the week here on Bronx Bombers comes from Frankie in Rego Park. And by the way, the email is joe@bronxbomberspodcast.com, or you can find us on Twitter @BombersPodcast is the handle, or give us a call at 646-854-4959. If you have any questions you want to have us answer on any future episodes, we are more than happy to do so. And Frankie writes, right now I don't really trust any of our starting pitchers. Well, Frankie, you're among friends. Who would you pick to start the wild card game? Well, thanks for that question, Frank. It's a good one. And I mean, just looking big picture for a second, it's kind of amazing that, it's even a question at all. I mean, all spring, Severino was lights out. I mean, very much in the Cy Young conversation. I mean, from the opener in Toronto through mid-July, Severino was 14-2 with a 2.12 ERA. I mean, we hadn't seen those kinds of numbers from a Yankee starter in years, if not decades. But things started to go south in a hurry in that last start against the Indians before the All-Star break. He lasted just 5 innings, 4 runs on 9 hits, and just 1 strikeout. So that was the clear turning point, and he just hasn't been the same since. Post All-Star break, Severino's record is 3-4. Opponents hitting a whopping .318 against him. That's horrendous. His ERA is a bloated 6.63. So the immediate thought, that might strike you is that he's injured. But I have to think that if he was, the Yankees would have him on the DL in like 2 seconds. But they haven't. And really, his velocity hasn't dipped at all. Now, I will say that lately he's been marginally better. But getting back to Frankie's question, I get why some people might argue that it should be Happ or Tanaka in that wild card game. Those are really the only 2 other options. Both are indeed capable of going out there and giving a good performance in a big game. Both have done so in the postseason in the past. But assuming he's healthy and his performances continue to stabilize this month, I'd go with Severino, Frank, but with a short leash, like very short, with a choke collar. I mean, I know the Twins killed him last year in the wild card game. I don't think he recorded an out in that game before Girardi pulled him. But in my experience watching baseball for 40 plus years, lightning doesn't usually strike twice like that. Severino now has a number of good postseason appearances under his belt, and he has the stuff, potentially at least, to put a lid on that Oakland A's lineup, which is definitely no joke. I mean, I've been saying that for a while. This summer, the Oakland A's have been the hottest team in baseball, hotter than the Red Sox even, and with $100 million less than we have to play with, hats off to Billy Beane. But Frankie, the added benefit of having Severino start the wild card game is the Red Sox have really had his number, and contrarily, Jay Happ has had the Red Sox number. And just to back that up with numbers, and these are career stats, Benintendi is hitting .458 off Severino, okay? But he does not have a single hit off of Happ. Betts is hitting .296 off of Severino, hitting .188 off of Happ. Mitch Moreland, of all people, is hitting .412 against Severino, 0 hits against Happ. Really, the only hitter on that Boston lineup that has good numbers against Happ is ex-Yankee and now Yankee killer Steve Pearce. I hate when that happens, don't you? Really annoying. But Pearce is hitting .357 against Happ in 28 at-bats, .286 against Severino. Honestly, that's not bad either, .286. But Frank, the numbers tell us that Happ gives you a better chance to beat the Red Sox than Severino. And if you have Sevy pitch that wild card game and we come out on top, you can start Happ in Game 1 against Boston, start him again in a potential Game 5. I'd go Tanaka Game 2, Sabathia, God help us, in Game 3, and Game 4, you go Severino. Yeah, there's a 6-day period of rest this year between the AL wild card and Game 4. So Frank, that's what I would do. Throw Severino out there for that wild card game. Let's hope it's in the Bronx. And brother, hold your breath, because that's going to be a white knuckle deal right there for sure. And that'll do it for this week's episode of Bronx Bombers. Again, don't forget, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher. Find us on Spotify. Follow us on Twitter, @BombersPodcast is the handle. Like us on Facebook as well, but most of all, have faith in the Yankees. We'll see you again next week.